Coach Belichick and I spent about a week together talking about, where was the emphasis going to be in year one? Where was the emphasis going to be in year two? And how are we going to create enough of a culture in year one that the year two emphasis can take it over and then run with it? And, we'll see what it looks like here between 1 and 2. But I really believe these next 5 games are going to be critical.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, as always, joined by the co-founder of Y Option and Best Coast Media, Jim Thornby. And today's episode is a look ahead into Week 9, and also an incredible conversation, I believe, with one of the more thoughtful coaches in college football, and a guy who has rapidly ascended in college football. That's right, Washington fans, is your head coach, Jedd Fisch. We talked to him in advance of the game that I'm grateful to be calling on Big Ten Networks against Indiana. It'll be at 9 a.m. Pacific, or as Jedd Fisch told us, they don't even say that anymore. They just go noon. It's a noon game. That's right, Jim. It's a noon game. Your old head coach at Arizona, of course, but it's a really fun conversation. He talks about his mentors, how he leans on Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll, and the impact that Sean McVay had on him, and of course where we are in this new world of college football, and a little tidbit around the game that Rhett Lewis and Guy Haberman and our incredible crew will be all over. Cannot wait to get there as College Game Day is on its way to Bloomington, Indiana. So with that said, Jim, we are right here. This is where our feet are today. And it's an interesting Week 9. Number one, I don't know about you, but I'm blown away that we are even in Week 9.
100% what I was going to say. Like when you first said that, when you said, Week 9, I was like, wait, is that right? No, that is right.
9. I mean, we're almost at 10.
Yeah,
and then it's over.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind since we touched down in Vegas for Big 12 and Mountain West and Pac-12 Media Day. Like it's been a whirlwind.
Oh my God!
Months, so
I haven't even thought about that.
Just buckle up and enjoy the ride for this last 6 weeks or so.
Yeah. Okay. And within the last 6 weeks, of course, we got the CFP coming up. We'll talk about that today. We've got big games coming up. We'll dive into that. But in a unique twist, remember, this is college football through the lens of the West Coast. Jim sent me a late night text message that the most important game of the week is one that doesn't include a Power 4 conference game. So, Jim, why is Boise State UNLV on Friday night the most critical game of the week in college football right now, according to Y Option?
Because of that, eventual G5 conference champion that's going to be at least one. I always got to put the caveat, at least one. I mean, it'll be one, but you got to say at least one of the G5s that is going to be in the playoff. And the team that, obviously it's going to be whoever the champion of the league is. So regardless of what the outcome of this is, this will still kind of help build the Mountain West some separation, I think, from the other G5s, depending on what else happens this weekend. Obviously, there's a big Notre Dame-Navy game this weekend as well. So Navy is hoping to be that, American would be the team, the conference that's in there. But as far as building up, it would be the highest ranked conference champion. So if Boise State and UNLV, especially if Boise wins this game on Friday night, they are in a really good spot. As long as Army or Navy don't go undefeated, to kind of be that team if they win the Mountain West championship game. And this is a rematch of last year's Mountain West championship game. And it's funny because that was the afternoon after the final Pac-12 championship game. And I remember like being in the press box that night, and they're like changing at the end of the night, and they're changing the field, putting the UNLV logo back up on there. So it's crazy. But both of these teams are 2-0 in Mountain West play. So is Colorado State and San Diego State. And San Diego State we'll mention here in just a sec. But these have kind of been the two teams that have kind of separated themselves on the field from of those four. Obviously, Austin Genty is insane. What did Dan Rubenstein call him this week? A cartoonishly good figure. Great line, by the way. But he's got 17 touchdowns. They've only played 6 games. They're one of only 13 teams that have only played 6 games this year. So he's putting up all those numbers in fewer games than everybody else right now. So, but it'll be interesting because matchup wise, these are two teams that are both very good at running the ball and very good at stopping the run. So who is the team that is going to be able to do that? And obviously, so far, no one has been able to stop Ashton Genty, but it'll be interesting to see because what is it? Boise State is 31st in run defense, is pretty good. Second rushing offense, obviously, but then UNLV 20th in rush defense and 5th in rushing offense. So yeah, I think should be a fun matchup. Hopefully, everybody gets ready to stay up late on Friday night to watch that game because it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, I'll be on the East Coast, but I will do my very best because then we have an early game the next day. But we dealt with that last time was in Indiana. I think Wazoo had the Friday night matchup really late into the evening. To that point, I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics. One is you look at UNLV. You referenced earlier, like, can't believe we're in week 9. Remember what happened to them just a couple weeks ago where their quarterback decided that he wanted to, hit the transfer portal? There's a lot, obviously, anybody can Google and figure that out. We've seen that among many teams. Indiana has a couple players that have just decided that they wanted to enter the transfer portal and hit their redshirt season, which I think is amazing when you're 7-0. Same thing for UNLV. They were undefeated at the time. Now they're still having an incredible season. I'm curious, like, their coach, he's one of the hottest guys in the country. He spent time, obviously, as a Power 5 head coach previously in the SEC. Like, where's he going to go? UNLV has doubled down. They're going to stay in the Mountain West, at least as of today. Right? We'll see what happens tomorrow. Boise State, they're going. Date and time. Timestamp the show. We should start having that little thing maybe if we need to around breaking news. But here comes Boise State. They're going to the Pac-12. And I just think there's an element there. There's a dynamic there. I wonder what it would be like to work in the Mountain West. Like, are you cheering for UNLV because of them being a mainstay? And do you want to get them into this initial 12-team playoff, to your point of being a conference champion, if they can get that done? And then you talk about the Heisman. As Heisman voters, like, it's hard not to recognize, obviously, what this running back has done in such a dynamic way. We're going to continue to effort to get him on the show because his story is amazing. And I love even what he said around Travis Hunter's comments. The humility that he showed. I think it was Destroyer. He's a YouTube rock star, former special teamer, I think, at UCF. Anyway, he's just got a humility that makes you want to lean in. So we'll watch that game. Why is it also impactful? Well, Washington State is still alive. You referenced they're going to play San Diego State this week, and they're still alive in the playoff, dramatically alive in the playoff. They've got star power. Yeah, go ahead. Teach us.
I was going to say that, it's funny because ESPN, the FBI, take it for what it's worth. It's still a computer simulation or whatever. They currently have them with a 13.3 chance of making the playoffs, which is the 23rd best chance ever out of everybody. That's so the way they had that laid out right now, they have a better chance than Pitt, who's undefeated in the ACC, better than Colorado, who's, just a game back in the Big 12, and better than Illinois, who, is right there in the thick of things in the Big 10. So while is it to say that it's likely that they're going to make it? No, I wouldn't say that it's likely, but there is definitely a chance. We've seen way too much craziness in college football over the years, and especially, in the last year, to say that, no, that can't happen. So we'll see. I mean, I maybe cautiously optimistic would be kind of the term there for them. But this is, they realistically have a chance if they can win out, and Texas Tech can continue to play well. Last week did not help. UW continued to play well, because those will be 2 good wins for them on their resume once at the end of the year when you start comping everything.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So we're gonna do like CFP presentations and arguments for teams on the West Coast as we get closer. Right, next week we'll start doing that, and then we'll kind of continue it every week in advance of the initial 12-team playoff. I just want to caution football fans that watch this, because we know that we're getting fans from the ACC and the Big 12 and of course the Big 10 that are watching this thing, and the Pac-12. We know that, let alone the SEC. Point being, if you see Washington State in that initial top 12, top 15, top 17, like, remember what they've done. Just remember the body of work. They beat a Washington team. They beat Wisconsin the last 2 years. And I know it's just this year, But I just want to make sure everybody's looking at Wazoo as they are a Power 4, Power 5 team, however you want to coin it, period. Right? They're not UNLV. Like, it's a different case study. Like, it just is. So I just say that to front load that case where they go down and handle business against San Diego State. Look out. Like, they are going to be dramatically in the conversation because they have a bye next week. So they won't play until that first rankings is released. So it will be a campaign, and the right campaign, the accurate campaign, I think, for Washington State to be in the conversation.
But they got to keep winning. I mean, that's,
of course, no doubt.
That's the thing, because like we look at their conference mate with Oregon State, like with 3 losses now, like that's not realistic. But now they're got the play to get in the right bowl game for them. Injuries have just kind of ravaged them, and then ironically they're playing at Cal this week in what is no longer a conference game. It was weird enough in week 2 or week 3 when we had the Apple Cup and the artist formerly known as the Civil War. But now this is just like the random, like, oh yeah, this is no, it's not a conference game.
I know. I'll tell you what, I hope that the schools out west continue to do that and find ways to play Oregon State and Washington State, just for the sake of, one, travel. Look no further than the record of teams when they have to travel east in multiple time zones, but also, two, just for the regionality and the sake of the sport. It's kind of nice to see Cal play Oregon State. I've called a bunch of those games in the past. Both teams have won a handful of times in recent eras. So for Trent Bray, can their team get healthy? Had a great conversation with Ted Robinson yesterday. We're going to try to get him on the podcast next week. He's called a ton of Oregon State and Washington State games this season on the CW. We had Max Brennan on last week, who called the most recent Oregon State game that ended in a little controversy against the aforementioned UNLV. So if you need a little context on any of that, go back and listen to some previous episodes.
And I'll say real fast on the Bees before we move on, like, they got to figure out, I mean, obviously injuries are a big part of it. They got to figure out the run defense, because the run defense has not been good this year, especially the last 5 games. And Jedd Knott is back to practicing this week. We'll see if he plays. It's been kind of like game time decision-y each week the last few weeks. So Jedd Knott against a banged up Oregon State run defense is not a good recipe for the Beavs.
No, I would agree with that. And for the Cal Bears, they got to finish in the red zone, right? Special teams have just killed them. I mean, we talk about Washington and special teams. They've struggled, right, kicking the football this year. For Cal, I mean, it's kind of like a tongue in cheek, but like, you got a guy who makes a kick in Vans on College Game Day, but then you struggle. And I feel for you. I played on that stadium at Pitt, and that is one of the worst places to kick in college football, right? So I feel for Justin Wilcox and their staff, them and SC. I mean, can you find teams that the script could be dramatically flipped if they made a couple plays or a couple kicks? God, I haven't seen anything like that with 2 teams on the West Coast in a long time. Okay, so let's talk about the West Coast. We got a new number 1. We touched upon it earlier in this week, and now we got Oregon, number 1 in the nation. 10 teams in the country in college football without a loss. They face 1-loss Illinois. Illinois lost a tough game at Penn State. They have not been fazed by environments. They went into Nebraska, won in double, or won in, it was either single or double overtime. I can't recall. But they're going to go in, and obviously, other than Ohio State, they're going to be, you could argue, the next toughest test, right? Boise State fans might disagree with that, but Illinois is no slouch. They got a run game that is physical. Granted, their star running back is done for the season. They got a pass game that can spin it. They've got gifted wide receivers on the outside, and I think they have a quarterback who's real. So I like this game. I think Oregon's still the more complete team, but they're going to have to play a complete game, like no negative plays. I'm stealing this from our friend Chris Peterson. Sins, self-inflicted negatives. Can't have them in this game. Can't have them at home. But I think this is going to be like a sneaky competitive game among 2 teams that might surprise people that are ranked in the top 20.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, well, Illinois is one of 2 teams so far this season, them and Tennessee, that have 3 AP Top 25 wins. So, I mean, they are battle tested. You can definitely say it. Now, granted, those teams that they played when they were ranked, a lot of them, are not getting the same respect that they did at the time of those games. And And it'll be interesting too, because Illinois only once ever have they beaten 4 AP top 25 teams in the same season. That was 1946. They've lost 7 straight against top 5 teams. The last time they won was when they beat number 1 Ohio State in 2007, which was actually the last time they faced the number 1 team, which I thought was kind of odd, thinking of like all the Ohio State and Michigan teams that they would have faced between 2007 and now, that one of them would have been. But when you have, even before the 4 West Coast teams came to the Big Ten, you still weren't playing everybody, every year. So, but that was the game. I don't remember. You remember Juice Williams, the Illinois?
Jim, I got a ball up here from the Rose Bowl in 2007. We put it all over Ron Zook in Illinois. So yeah, I remember game planning for that one.
Yeah,
for sure.
So Juice had 4 passing touchdowns in that game. And I looked at that Ohio State team and I'm like, how is that Ohio State team ranked number 1? Like, there was not a lot of familiar faces. Like Brian Hartline was the most familiar face on the roster, and now he's on the coaching staff. But that should be interesting. And then, so let's keep it in the Big Ten with the undefeateds, because this is one of the games. This is your game of the week. Washington at number 13, Indiana. The Michael Penix Bowl. He says he's rooting for UW, even though he's got his degree from Indiana. He's rooting for his dogs this week.
I love what Jedd Fisch said in his media availability this week. It's great when guys finish their careers and then they go to the NFL, because they always reference the school they finished with. Yeah. Right? Like, very rarely, if you turn on a Falcons game, and I know he just got some burn for the first time, or they're like, Indiana quarterback Michael Penix Jr. Like, it's Washington record-setting Heisman finalist. Yeah. And I think to Jedd Fisch's point, like, you're just playing off of that in recruiting. I'll say this. Indiana is real. Like, I know that it just sounds like a sexy storyline, but I've called a game of them this season. I know guys on their staff really well. Mike Shanahan, Tino Sinceri. Remember those names. They are going to be some of the hottest in the country once the coaching cycle begins to unfold. That's the offensive coordinator and co-OC and quarterback coach. 2 former Pitt Panthers. And Coach Cignetti, he's from the Pittsburgh area, right? Like, great ties from there. And I love that, because they have that kind of edge. They got a toughness about them. They play that way. I think they ran for 5 touchdowns against Nebraska. Nebraska allowed 1 all season. They ran for over 200 yards last weekend against Nebraska's front, which allowed less than 90 per game all season. I mean, it's a physical out. They've lost their starting quarterback, Curtis Rourke. You could argue he and Dylan Gabriel. I wouldn't even argue. I'd say he and Dylan Gabriel are the top 2 quarterbacks playing at the highest level in the Big Ten. And underneath that, probably Ohio State and USC. And you can kind of make some case from some other guys. Illinois, as you referenced earlier as well. But he was playing at an elite level. He leaves last weekend's game against Nebraska, and in comes the backup. Let me give you a little context on the backup for UW fans. You're going to be facing a young man named Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson grew up in the state of Indiana. Taven Jackson was an Elite 11 quarterback. Taven Jackson can simply spin it. He signed to Tennessee, played as a true freshman, transferred to Indiana, started 5 games last year, and then here comes this new coach. And in comes the former MAC Player of the Year on offense in Curtis Rourke. He doesn't leave. In fact, in the spring, he probably looked the best. When I was there in training camp, I thought he looked better at quarterback in one singular practice. He didn't win the job. Curtis Rourke balled out. What is my point? My point is that I think his ceiling is higher than Curtis Rourke's. His floor, we'll find out, right? So going into this game, as I'm kind of finished with my game plan here now, it is all going to be how they call the game, right? How much are they asking him to read full field reads? How much is it pure progression of 1 to 2 to 3? What are they doing in the RPO game? Because they're facing a defense in Steve Belichick, yes, Bill Belichick's sons at UW, that is extremely diverse. You'll see 3 down linemen, you'll see 5 down linemen, you'll see kind of a variety of bodies in there. So much to the point where, like, you can't be like, that's a linebacker. You just have to, that's an X, right? That's a DB. No, that's just an X. It's just a person. So how do they navigate that? How do they block that? How do they protect that defense of Steve Belichick? And Steve Belichick's defense, which is ranked in the top 10 in many categories in the country, they've played like what I call like the old school Big Ten schedule. We talked to Jedd Fisch about that coming up here on today's episode. They played Iowa. They've played teams that want to run the football. They have played teams that aren't dramatically dynamic on offense, right? If you look at their most recent games, Michigan being a huge win that they had and kind of reclaiming that glory after the national championship loss. And now here come, like, call it Pac-12 offenses, if you will, or new school offenses. Indiana's going to spin it. They want to run the football, but they can spin it. SC coming up the week after, they can spin it. So on and so forth, and they finish with the Oregon Ducks. Like, they're about to play like a totally different style of offenses. So I don't really know what the defense is coming into this game. So what is the key? The key for Washington to win, they have to jump on them early, and they have to run the football. Indiana has not been behind at all season. At all. They haven't trailed.
I think it's them and Army, the only two teams in the country that have not trailed at any point.
That's amazing. I'm stealing that stat for the game. Thank you very much.
So I got another one for you coming up, but go ahead.
Okay. So then my last point is that Jonah Coleman needs to have a day. We're going to talk about it in the open of the broadcast. If you tune in, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 o'clock Eastern, he needs to go. I think this offense can go. They've kind of figured out the offensive line. Another guy goes down, their left tackle. Jedd Fisch talked about that earlier in the week as well. But if they can run the football and set up the play action game and test that secondary, they got every shot of an upset in front of Lee Corso, the former Indiana coach, the last time these two teams even played. So I'm juiced. It's a great game. Game day will be there. I can't wait to see our friends, Reese Davis, Kirk Herbstreit and company, and then call the game.
Yeah, well, it's funny because just, to talk about, the history of Indiana football, and how this team stands out from all the rest of that. You look at, they have 6 straight games now with 40-plus points. School record. I mean, that's not a big surprise. I mean, that, Antoine Randall wasn't doing that. Lee Corso's teams weren't doing that. So 6 straight games of 40-plus points. The previous 7 seasons, they had 7 games with 40-plus points. So just to put that into context, how different of an Indiana team this is, at least to recent history and really overall history. But it's crazy. So it'll be fun to watch to see what UW's defense is able to do to slow these guys down.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into it, man. Really, a bunch of ways. Okay, we got Penn State going to Wisconsin. I think Penn State wins that game. Wisconsin's record is impressive. Their offensive line is massive, but I think Penn State's the more talented team. But Wisconsin will give them everything they have. The music will be rolling. We know what that scene is like there. If you've ever been to that stadium, they gave Alabama all they can handle. But I think Penn State gets a big win. To your point of Navy, they're trying to remain undefeated. They play Notre Dame. Big playoff implications in this game for both of those teams. And how about BYU going to UCF? And how about BYU? It's just been fun to watch. Sorry, Utah fans, but Kalani Sitake was it felt like the hottest of hot seats coming into the season, Jim. And now look at this team. And you go on and watch any of those games on TV and you're like, damn, that place looks insane. So that'll be a fun one as well.
Well, it's funny. So just kind of wrapping up the other undefeateds that are playing this week. Your Pitt Panthers playing on Thursday night against Syracuse.
Larry Fitzgerald will be there, by the way, getting celebrated at that game, and that is going to be awesome. I'm calling it the Michael Molinari Bowl. Our good friend Michael Molinari, all the Syracuse grads, all of you guys. I know you're going to want to talk a bunch of smack in this game. It's an old school Big East matchup. We win Big East matchups.
And speaking of old school, what's more old school than Florida State, Miami?
Wide left, wide right.
Yeah, it's funny because what is it here? They've actually beat the last 2 times that they played Miami when Miami was in the top 10. They beat them 2013, 2016. They had lost six straight against a top 10 Miami team from 2000, 2004. Yes, 6 times between 2000 and 2004, they played a top 10 Miami team. 6 times between 2000 and 2004, just to make sure that
and there was no playoff, right?
Yeah,
just no playoff.
So that sinks in there. But the 5 of the last 6 against the top 10 Miami team, those games have been decided by 8 points or less. And then oddly, Liberty is still undefeated. They played Kennesaw State this week. But going back, because you kind of said Penn State's going to win that game. I think at least 3 of these undefeated teams are going down this week. I think Wisconsin's going to come through. They're the last 3 weeks since that USC game, outscoring their opponents 117-16.
Okay.
I mean, granted, the opponents have not been, they've been the lower tier of the Big Ten, but I think for some reason, this is one of those games that guys trips them up. I think Florida State is going to put it together. I think it's one of those games where they're just going to show up and go we don't care about the rest of the season. We're winning this game. It's Miami. It's the rivalry game. I mean, it's the one where you're You just throw everything out the window and they come through there. So I think there's going to be, and I don't know about your Pitt Panthers, but we'll see.
At home, oh God, you're
I think there's going to be a lot of chaos this weekend with these undefeated teams. I think that number is probably going to get cut in half.
How about Navy and Notre Dame?
Yeah,
I mean, it's at MetLife Stadium.
It's funny if you're Washington State, who are you rooting for in this game? Because I mean, I guess you're rooting for Navy, right? Because you want Notre Dame to not be in that mix, because you're not really competing with Navy for a spot. Because if they go on to win the American, like that's a separate deal. You're not, it's not a spot. When you're going for that large bid, Notre Dame's in your way. So Cougs fans, you need to be pulling for Navy this weekend.
Yeah, that's a good discussion. I don't know, because let's just say Navy runs the table. Let's say Boise State wins the Mountain West and runs the table.
Ooh,
now you
got two.
Yeah. So I don't.
Then you're on the lookout for the Big 12 and the ACC. I mean, right now the ACC looks like they're in good shape with Miami or Clemson. One of those teams are going to stay in the upper echelon there. The Big 12, I mean, they got bailed out by BYU and and Iowa State pulling those games out last week. So it'll be interesting to see.
Okay, all right.
But that's my take on undefeated teams.
I like that. I like where your head's at, other than the Pitt Panthers. So we'll see how Jim is. Florida State, they either get boat raced or they win in an upset. That's where I'm going with that one. The Big Ten, Rutgers and USC. Talk about weeknight games, right? They've got a Thursday night Pitt game. How about a Friday night USC game? 8:00 post World Series. Are we already in the World Series? The World Series?
That'll be right after game one. So
that'll be game
one.
There we go.
Fox pulled out an absolute miracle for this to kind of happen here. So you got New York, LA audience you got the baseball game going right into the football game. Now, granted, no offense, Rutgers, but I don't know if that necessarily counts as the quote unquote New York audience, but you're getting. It really just kind of worked out fortuitously for Fox. So kudos to them, to their programming department for pulling that one off.
Amen. I'm not surprised, but a little bit shocked that people are calling for Miller Moss. He was Lincoln Riley was asked, is he still the starter? Yeah, he's still the starter. I think
the look on his face I don't know if you've seen the video of that for the post practice, but he kind of look. He's like, yeah,
what are you talking about?
Are we really having this conversation?
Yeah, let's not have that conversation, because we don't need to give it any more smoke. But to that point, I think for both of these teams, right? We got a Rutgers team coming off a tough loss against UCLA. They were down multiple key starters, 2 tight ends, 2 defensive ends. They need to hopefully get healthy for this game. They need to run the football in this game. USC is the more talented team. They need to navigate the emotional fatigue we talked about in our earlier episode with Dan Rubenstein earlier this week. If they can do that and jump on them early, they'll have a shot in this game. But Kyle Monangai is one of the better running backs that USC has faced. He's a different running back than the ones at Michigan. He's a different running back than the one they faced at Wisconsin. He's a monster, man. He's a little dude, but he packs a powerful punch. That team is thrilled to come play at the Coliseum. SC, you don't get a lot of opportunities there. I imagine that will be the note that Lincoln Riley says, let's not miss it, and hopefully make it a really fun night for Los Angeles sports. I don't know how many people will be there. It's hard to get people to go to anywhere in LA for a sports game on a weeknight, especially in football. We've seen it at USC. We've seen it at UCLA. USC is down right now, but clearly they need to get this win. Other Big Ten games, just for reference, Nebraska goes to Ohio State. I hope it's a tight game, because I got Nebraska next week against UCLA. So you're always hoping for the team to get a win. But Ohio State, I think, is coming off a bye week. Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, I think they'll have the team ready to roll. Michigan State at Michigan. Michigan has not named a starter at quarterback. If it's me, and I know nothing, if it's me, I am finding a way to get Alex Orji on the field. He's the best athlete, if not the second best athlete on the team in terms of all the metrics in the weight room. He's an absolute freak. Run triple option, run QB run game. Whatever you got to do, just make them defend him. And Michigan State is ascending a little bit. Aiden Childs, how does he do on the road now in this opportunity, coming off a big-time win at home against Iowa, who faces and hosts Northwestern? That'll be kind of a fun rubber match. It's going to come down to explosive plays. Maryland, Minnesota off a bye week. Maryland off an epic comeback against USC. I can go either way. I'll probably go Minnesota because they are at home. So let's go to the Big 12. Arizona, you are dialed. I don't know if you did your weekly radio hit with Justin Spears and company. West Virginia at Arizona. I love the Rich Rod Bowl in your notes here. We got Utah at Houston, Cincy at Colorado. Key ones here on the West Coast. Where do you go, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just from the alumni part of me, I'm going to be, all dialed in on West Virginia and Arizona. But the one that I'm really curious to watch is the Utah and Houston game, just to see what happens with Utah's offense now with the coordinator change. Obviously, we talked about that at length in the previous offense. And Houston has not been very good. They're 1-3 in the Big 12. They've scored 14 points or less in all 5 of their losses this season, but they do have a top 20 pass defense. So it'll be interesting to see, that's of the timing of that for Utah and what the offense looks like, how they get their pieces going. Cause I think just from a matchup, of strength and to really see where this Utah program is right now. I think that game is really intriguing.
Yeah, I think Utah, my gut says they're going to run the daylights out of the ball, but you don't know with this new OC. Like, you're injecting new life into this offense. What do they try to do? Turn it over against any team, you're in trouble. We've seen that from Utah this season. They got to get back on track. They might be the biggest surprise for me all season long right now as we enter into week 9 of not being what we anticipated and expected them to be, regardless of injuries, because the defense has not been what it traditionally is either. Fun game in the ACC. Wake Forest goes to Stanford. Stanford fans, go out and support your team. Period. End of story. You got the Bachmeier brothers battling each other, so that'll be pretty fun head-to-head in that regard. I think Colorado gets a win against Cincinnati, and then we'll see kind of what happens with Vanderbilt and Texas. I think Texas...
Cincy's a dangerous team. It's interesting. I mean, obviously they beat ASU last week, and the Sun Devils are on a bye. Cincy's 5-2. Their 2 losses by a combined 4 points. They lost to your Pitt Panthers and they lost to Texas Tech.
So you're calling an upset here?
I'm not. Well, I mean, neither team is ranked, so it's hard to say that a quote unquote upset. I haven't looked at the gambling lines on that, so. But I would imagine Colorado probably is favored, just off the top of my head. But I think that Cincinnati is just a dangerous team. They're not a top 25 team, but I think they're just a dangerous team.
Yeah, I saw a tweet earlier this week, just to kind of spin it forward a little bit. There was something about like what Arizona is doing, what UW is doing, and what Alabama is doing. And
those three are going to be tied together all year long.
Yeah, no doubt.
Just because of the dominoes.
Yeah, so I hope they all win. Bama got to get back on track against Missouri, which is really dangerous at home. We'll see what happens at quarterback. I was asked earlier this week on a radio show, like, is Alabama going to make a change at quarterback? Again, a question that surprised me.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye on that. Ty Simpson being the backup. All right, let's get to a guy who, to me, understands offense and quarterback play better than anybody. He's to me, a really elite coach. I felt that way about Jedd Fisch since I met him in 2009. We both interviewed for the Seahawks that day. He took the quarterback coach. I started talking about quarterbacks on television. But we have stayed connected over the course of both of our journeys. Huge fan of him, his wife Amber, their family, and just the trajectory, right? He's been to a bunch of different places, but he's pulled the best from every place he has been. He finds himself now in year 1 as the head coach at Washington. They've been in a bunch of tight games, notwithstanding their most recent game against Iowa. They're coming off a bye week, and now they head to Bloomington, Indiana for an early start. As College GameDay will be there, we will be calling the game. And we dive into the game. We dive into his past. We dive into his mentors and, of course, the quarterback position and how he views the most critical position, I think, in all of sport. As always, these conversations, this section of every interview and every show is fueled by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. So thank you to Washington Jedd Fisch for pausing and giving us a few minutes. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Here's the head coach at UW, Jedd Fisch. So with that, we got the head coach at UW, Jedd Fisch. Coach, I can't help but every time I talk to you, I think about when we met in 2009 in a restaurant at the top of the Hyatt in Bellevue, both interviewing in Seattle for the Seahawks. You, of course, went to the Seahawks. Now you're back in Seattle, year 1 of UW. Like, when you think back to that moment, here we are more than 10 years later. I'm curious your first reaction.
Yeah, it's every now and then it brings back good memory when I see Pete at most of our games, or I ran into him after we beat Michigan in BC's office, and that was great memories. And I remember being up there on the at Ruth Chris one time there, my first night on the job, meeting Pete Carroll for the first time, kind of awestruck. Of just like, I don't know, I was what was it, 14 years ago now. So, I mean, I was 34 and Pete Carroll was Pete Carroll, and it was just a super cool thing. And then Sark was the head coach at UW, and I remember, going out with those guys and Nussmeier and Sark and just getting to meet them one night. And it was cool. It was just a super cool experience. And to be back here now, pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And congrats on everything along the way. It was a blast getting to know you then, and of course, staying in touch with you and your incredible family since then. I'm going to be calling your game this weekend, so looking forward to that. We'll be going to Indiana, UW. It's a huge game. Of course, College Game Day will be there. We'll get into that in a minute. But it's a little over 9 months since you've taken the job at Washington. And a lot has gone on, right? The college football world has flipped upside down, has turned left and right a million different times. But I'm curious for you, as you've settled in, like, what is the best part of your job and the seat that you sit in now at Washington?
I'd probably say the best part about being here is the competition that we get to play every week. Like it's something special. The Big Ten, we have the next 3 road games. The 3 teams that we're playing are 21-0. We play at Indiana, at Penn State, at Oregon. And in between, we have home games against USC and UCLA. So, like, the schedule, the NFL feel to it, that every week is a huge week. The pageantry, the sellout crowds. I would say by far that's been the best part of the 9 months. There's been some challenges along the way of recreating a roster, recreating a team. So there's always been, you want to be able to always put your best foot forward. At times we have, at times we haven't. But the idea of being in this conference is probably the best part.
Okay, I've heard you say that a few times in comp to the NFL. To your point, like this weekend's game, I think it's around 90 players for both teams who are not on either team a year ago. Right? That doesn't happen in the NFL. So how have you gotten to know guys? Like, how have you made sure that the connection, that element among you and the players that are now on your team, is at a premium in an area that can be relatively transactional in terms of rosters changing and ebbing and flowing pretty consistently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a premium because that's the way I like to coach. I like to relationship coach. I like to know the guys. I like to know what makes them tick. I like the interaction, the one-on-one, the group setting where they trust me that I can make a correction and they don't feel like it's personal. Yet I like the personal aspect of coaching. It's a little bit more challenging in year one because you need to put a team together. The first thing you have to do is get enough people. When I got here, there was 44 guys on scholarship, and I got hired here, after the portal closed and after signing day. So, our situation was even more unique than Indiana's situation where you get hired November 30th. So we had to find players. We didn't have spring. Like, we had 20 of the 8, we had 66 scholarship players that participated in spring football. So until we have 84 scholarships right now, 18 of those guys didn't even participate in spring ball. So this year's different. This year's unique. I don't ever expect it to look like or feel like this again, really. It's not how I want to build our program. I don't want to build our program with, the mercenary approach. I want to build it with relationships and watch development of players. With our coaching staff, I really trust BC and Steve and Jimmy and Powell and Casey and all the guys that I've had with me for a while now, Kafus and Jay Rich and Scotty Graham. And, let them be in T.O.'s strength and conditioning program. Let them be coached by our guys and not get caught up in always just trying to grab a guy for a year.
Yeah, you've always been a relationship guy. In that regard for this year, I just keep looking at you as the head coach and think back to like how that definition of head coach has just dramatically shifted, right? You're the play caller, you're the head coach, you're the CEO, you're the fundraiser, and you're putting together a new roster, as you just referenced. Like, how have you been able to be in the weeds, yet zoom out and still be that CEO? And I'm curious your process of navigating that literally week to week.
Yeah, it's been tricky. Try to throw in the word and the dad and a
dad, husband. I'm sorry, Amber.
And a husband, right? Yeah, let's we got to make sure Amber gets her credit too for this, because this has been that year one transition is always right the biggest challenge of trying to be everything, right, and not get caught up in doing everything but not doing anything well. You got to be able to do both, and I've just really kind of committed that the best thing I can do is try to develop a team camaraderie and a team chemistry. I'm very fortunate that every offensive coach came with me. So everything we're in year 4 as a staff offensively, right? BC, Jimmy, Scotty, KC, Pow. And then 3 of our GAs came with us. So like that group, that core is able to do some things that 4 years ago they couldn't do without me. Now they do. On the same token, I never want to give up being in that meeting and watching that practice tape. So their hours haven't been as good as they probably would like them to be, because you got to be a head coach too. And team meetings are the most important in year 1. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So I've spent a lot of time focusing on the messaging with our team, fundraising and building relationships with donors. We are getting $35 million less dollars at Washington than the other 16 Big Ten teams are getting. Oregon, maybe gets subsidized, maybe they don't. I don't know, from some donorship, but Oregon and Washington are half share programs. So we need to really build that relationship with our donor base and our fundraisers. So there's some things that normally I wouldn't do in season that I need to do to make sure we can galvanize and cultivate those relationships. And then culture, man, it's like they got to understand where I'm coming from. I got to understand where they're coming from. And, Washington has been a program in 25 years that has ups and downs and ups and downs. And, 3 years ago, they're 4-8. A year ago, they're 14-1. So, we want to try to build a consistent culture. We got to stay here. We've had players on our team that have had 4 head coaches that are, in their 5th or 6th. Cam Fab has played for 4 head coaches. So we got to build consistency. We got to build a culture of love. We got to build a culture of trust. And then on top of that all, we have to find a way to continue to get better in ball.
Okay, last couple before we cut you loose here, Coach. If you took this job, call it 7 years ago, versus the mentorship, and I haven't been in your new office. I can't wait to check it out. But I remember your old office, and there were quotes from a lot of your mentors. And I remember Sean McVay, Bill Belichick. You've already referenced Pete Carroll. But if you didn't have the Sean McVay experience, if you didn't have the Bill Belichick experience, I'm curious how you would have been able to navigate what you're navigating now. So what do you think you've taken from 2 or 3 of those mentors more recently in your career that you've applied to the scenario you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even we all think we're ready, right? We all think we're ready when we're 30. Then we all think we're ready when we're 35. Then we all think we're ready. But I really do believe that, like the Garth Brooks song, sometimes you thank God for unanswered prayers. I really believe that, I needed that time with Sean. And it wasn't just with Sean, who how much I love Sean, but I mean, down my hallway was Zach Taylor was in the office next to me, Shane Waldron in the other office, Zach Robinson, Liam Cohn, Wes Phillips, Wade Phillips, Chris Shula. That was the hallway. Those guys are all NFL coordinators right now. Matt LaFleur's office is who I moved into. So the amount of like football knowledge and relationships and resources in that one hallway in 2018, 2019 is an enormous help to me. And then leaving there to go to New England, like number one, I met Steve, and now he's our defensive coordinator doing a fantastic job here. But number two, to be able to build that relationship with Coach Belichick and be able to use him as a resource on a weekly to almost daily basis has been incredible.
Is there something you can point to like, yep, that was an example, or either leaned on that hallway or leaned on Coach Belichick?
I mean, I lean on that hallway and continue to lean on that hallway weekly. And Shane and Zach and I probably are on a text chain on a daily. But like all of us, there's just times like making this decision to leave Arizona to go to Washington. I leaned on 3 or 4 of those guys. Making the decision on, how to build a roster. Coach Belichick and I spent about a week together talking about, where was the emphasis going to be in year one? Where was the emphasis going to be in year two? And how are we going to create enough of a culture in year one that the year two emphasis can take it over and then run with it? And, we'll see what it looks like here between 1 and 2. But I really believe these next 5 games are going to be critical. So I rely on Coach. I rely on Sean. I rely on that hallway a lot.
Okay, so let's get to the game here. Can't wait to be calling it 9 a.m. Pacific, which I've gotten used to saying now, right? Noon Eastern. We'll both
We
be
just say noon. We just say it's at noon. We don't talk here like it's 9 a.m.
Okay, cool. Yeah, noon Eastern. I'm with you on that. Okay, away we go. We'll all be in Bloomington. I think you guys fly out Thursday. I fly out Thursday this week as well. With that said, when I look at your schedule, and you reference your defense, it's statistically one of the best in America, and it's really been fun and a joy to prepare and watch them. But you've kind of faced, in my eyes, like the traditional Big Ten, and now here comes like pass happy Big Ten or like quarterback Big Ten. Even with Curtis Rourke being out, Taven Jackson he's an Elite 11 quarterback. He's talented, as you know. What is it like in that regard, or what might you anticipate this weekend coming off a stretch of dramatically different offenses compared to what you're going to see?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a great test. This has been like it's the halfway point and truly the halfway point. I mean, I know we played 7 games, not 6, but I mean, it is the bye week came at a great time for a reset. You just got a huge win against Michigan. Then you get a very disappointing loss against Iowa on the road. And I mean, and those were the 2 teams that played in the Big Ten championship game last year. And now we're in the world of the new wave, right? Indiana, completely new. SC, Pac-12 team that moved over. Then Penn State is playing at an elite level, top 5 program in the country. Then back to UCLA, Pac-12 team, finish with Oregon, Pac-12 team. So it's so unique that we're now in that world again to finish this season off. So it has been a whirlwind. It's a great test for our defense. It's a great test for our offense. And it's a great test for really building the foundation of our program.
Well, I can't wait to call it. I hope you get on the set at College Game Day. We'll be tuned in and see if it happens. I know it's right up to kickoff, so it might be tight, but I can't wait to see you and your program on the field in my first game calling UW this season, which is weird too in the Big Ten, Coach. So thanks for the time.
Well, it's great to have the expert calling the game. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks, brother. And lots of love, of course, to Amber and the crew. Without them, none of this happens. They get the MVP. That's right. All right. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks, pal.
It's the Afterglow. That was Jedd Fisch, head coach at the University of Washington. That part is always fueled by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know as you are on the go, go, go. Jim, your takeaways from the former head coach at your alma mater and now the current head coach at UW.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think it was what we talked about, in the lead up to this interview, and we talked about off air about, that they don't think about this as a 9 a.m. game coming up. They think of it as a noon game. I'm just really curious to see like what kind of if they approach anything differently with that game. But obviously, Jedd is a really smart guy. I mean, especially from as far as marketing a program. I mean, I don't know if I've met anybody who gets that part of it better than he does. I remember, when he was at Arizona, I was working in football communications, he would give like these little ideas about media day. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, I'm just taking notes because it's just like, yeah, that makes sense of like, these guys know how to sell their programs better than anybody because it's personal to them. So sometimes you just got to be the one that shuts up and listens and and takes their advice. So I think it's going to take some time just because of the roster turnover, and he talked about that obviously. But I think he's going to wind up doing a really good job up there in Seattle.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that he is the right man for that job and that place. That place can win. That place has resources. They'll continue to pour into the football because they care so much about that program. And look no further than less than a year ago, and they're playing for the national championship. So that school is more than capable of playing among the best in America. My takeaway is this, and we're going to show a graphic of it during the broadcast. So this little tease for Saturday. Tune in on the Big Ten Network, 9 a.m. Pacific, or as Jedd Fisch said, it's just a noon game. It's just a noon game. To that point, both teams have about 90 players that were not on the roster a year ago. Jedd Fisch talked about that. When you look at those players, the amount that were all conference players at Indiana is dramatically different than the amount that were all conference players at Washington. It just is. And I think that it's interesting in terms of, A, the timing of the hires, right? Jedd has referenced that a few times now. The portal windows, which I think it opened my eyes. Like, to me, I'm not a fan of the second portal window. But to his point, if you're hired late, if you don't have a second portal window, you don't have a team, right? So there's a world where like you kind of have to keep that thing alive just based on the nature of the game and having to build a team. So I just think it's really cool when you look at Curt Cignetti and the model of him coming from a lower level, bringing a bunch of accomplished players who are really talented football players and might have been an inch and a half short, 15 pounds less, a hand size 2 inches smaller, from being a Power 5 offer, a Power 4 offer. And they're driven to remind everybody that they weren't given a major offer in the Big Ten, for instance. And then here's UW with a bunch of guys that are coming from a variety of different schools trying to mold as well in year one. So it's year one for both, but I think totally different when you dive into the players that are there, the numbers that are there. And then I go to scheme. And that's where I think I'm most excited about this matchup on Saturday to spin it forward is like Jedd Fisch he's the play caller. He's going to be masterful when it comes to that on Saturday. And he's going up against a very talented, aggressive, dynamic defensive front seven. And they want to run the football. Okay, how does that thing net out? Do they take the ball and try to score first and put Indiana in a compromising position, which is they've never been behind, as you referenced earlier in the show, all year long? And then on the flip side, how is Washington going to navigate a very dynamic Indiana offense? And does that offense change with now a new starting quarterback for this game? So there's going to be a lot to talk about, a lot of storylines, and really just thankful for Jedd to take the time on a game week when it's an early game. I think they're going to fly out on Thursday as well, so flying out a day early. So awesome, Jim, getting the interview, and big thanks to Jeff Bechtel and Haley and everybody up there for making that thing happen. So that's all I got, Jim. Anything else before we cut it loose?
No, I mean, I could go on a long tangent about the whole transfer thing, but we'll save that for another. Put that in the back pocket. It's just kind of incorporating what Dan Rubenstein talked about earlier this week, and kind of what Dion has talked about in the past. But like again, that's like a 10-minute conversation. So we'll save that we'll put that in the back pocket.
Okay, I feel like we're going to have Brandon Huffman on soon. That might be a tease as well for early December. Okay, all right, so there it is, Week 9. That's our preview. Also, our interview with Jedd Fisch. Again, thank you to 76, our founding partner, for making that thing happen. Make sure you share it with a friend. And go over to our YouTube channel. It is growing and growing and growing. So thank you all. We know that is a big part of where people find content, listen to podcasts, and we will be all over it this weekend. Follow Y Option on social all weekend long. Jim is dialed on all things football. That's where I go for all my news, before a game or after a game. Never during the game, Jim. Never during the game, okay? And away we go. We'll have you Saturday night. We'll give you a little content from the booth. I'll try to show you some stuff that's going on at game day on the road. So keep it locked at Y Option on all things social media. And we'll see you Sunday with emptying the call sheet. Who knows what is going to happen? To Jim's point, maybe it is upset city in Week 9. Lots of love. Stay safe. Peace.